order to regenerate quickly. That was his idea of economy and how he treated his subordinates. And this is a profound ethical question. How do you treat your subordinates? Do you give them rest, time for their families, or do you just want them to work? He must have been a very strong man, as the picture implies, and a very powerful and willful and dominant man. So he had his view on how people should work, and it's profoundly ethical. Then he moves, and I will quickly touch this, to the Greek philosophers that have had a profound influence on the Western world and on all of the world, and points out two main strains of the Greek philosophy. The one is Stoicism, which ethically is close to Christianity, but it has no hope. It is accepting fate as something that you cannot change and standing up against it. The example of this would be the philosopher Socrates, who was a wise man, and he made some uncomfortable statements to the community and criticized, so they didn't like it, and they accused him and sentenced him to death by drinking a cup of poison, and which he did, accepting the fate, and his disciples were crying and whining around him, but he died as an exemplary Stoic by taking the fate and accepting it and not despairing, just being brave. And the contrast would be how Jesus died. Jesus took his death as well, but he expressed forgiveness to his enemies and those who brought him to the cross. That's the death of God. And Socrates died as a Stoic. Virtue and duty are essential to Stoicism. Temperance instead of maximization. So being moderate and using things well. There's a lot of good ethics in Stoicism. Epicureanism is the other main strain of Greek philosophy, according to the philosopher Epicure. And their motive is profit and desire. Satisfy and gratify desire and make profit and enjoy life. It's the source of egoism, also of vision, because you want to reach further, you want to maximize. And calculation come from this philosophy. But both of them are limited, and they are in a way contradictory, and they were irreconcilable even in the Greek history, two conflicting approaches. Again, it stops. That's too bad. Why does it? I don't know why I have this problem. Perhaps we should pray. Father, I pray that this technology will work and not continue to interrupt. So I have to... Yeah. Oh, the Bible, there's a biblical... Oh, I lost this slide here. I must have lost a slide here. In contrast to, I have a slide which I will give you this slide show. I will give it to the school, and you can have it from that, all of my slides and all of my papers. The biblical approach to this would be integrating both And you have it in a verse in Proverbs where it says, young man, enjoy your life, but take care and be aware that you will be held responsible for what you do. So this single verse in Proverbs contains both aspects that the Stoics, that the Greeks could not bring together in their philosophy. They had Stoicism and Epicureanism. And in this one verse, the Bible says, yes, life is made for enjoyment. Enjoy it, young man, but be aware of responsibility. You will be held responsible for what you do. That's what the Stoics stood for. And yeah, I have a slide for that as well. Now, as we look at the development of Western philosophy, it's very clear that the Epicureans with desire and vision and gratification and egoism won out in approach of economics. The French philosopher René Descartes is the founder or the author of this famous statement, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. And he was trying to prove God, and he was in this whole debate of whether God is there and can he be proven. And he felt that thinking is the only thing that I can prove. I can prove to myself that I think. That is the only reality. And therefore he reduced reality to everything that he could think of and imagine. That's the foundation of modern rationalism, and it's also the foundation of reductionism. Reductionism, reducing reality to small models, helps solve problems to some degree, because when you isolate a certain problem and reduce it, then you can find solutions. But the danger of these reductionist approaches is that after a while you take the reduction for the whole picture and forget that it's only a reduced model. Then there were other models, Bernhard Mandeville. That's just to give you an overview. It's not important to know this, but for your notes, just to have it. Bernhard Mandeville was the first modern economist. He said that's very extreme Epicurean. The more vice, the more material wealth. The invisible hand of the market will rule it. Common good must be built on egoism. So he strongly believed in egoism. If people are eager to earn more, they will produce more, and the general wealth will flow. That is true in some way, but it really ignores the reality of evil that we know from the scriptures, because all the issue of greed and exploiting others and not taking care of the poor comes in if you make egoism the highest goal. But this has won greatly in Western societies, wherever God is pushed aside and left out of the picture. Then this cruel, we call it predatory capitalism. That means capitalism that robs rather than produces and blesses. Adam Smith is a famous figure. He refuted this idea. He was more on the side of morals, of Stoicism. For him, vices were rust in the gears. He pleaded for morals in economics. So he was a very good generalist. Mandeville's thesis, however, was preferred and became the foundation of greed-based economics. Oh, here the Old Testament, yeah, comes in. Yeah, I put this later. I changed the order. The Kingdom Economics is my title for this overview. Here we see the Jewish approach. The Old Testament, Torah of the Jews, combines and transcends both extremes of the Greeks. Ecclesiastes 11:9 is the verse. Enjoy your life, but be aware that you will be held accountable. The Old Testament moral economic cycle. Now, that's an interesting and important point. The economic cycle is something that we can observe in the history of the Jews, the Israelites. It says the following: Keep the commandments, the rules of God, then you will be successful. This runs throughout the books of Moses, the books of Moses, the prophets, the kings. When the Israelites followed God's rules that he set up, they were blessed, they were successful, they were doing well. And excuse me, the overruling principles was not even to follow rules, but the love of God and the law, and not just duty. The difference between, for instance, Stoicism and other philosophies with good rules is that the motivation of the Jewish nation came from the love of a personal God and Savior, and then also the love of his law. So love is the basis and not duty or following rules, sheer obedience. When you know God personally, of course, and understand that he is the maker of everything, obedience is the only reasonable reaction, the only thing that makes sense. That's why obedience is, of course, talked about all over in the Bible, because if you disobey, it's like working against the machine, working against the construction. If you're driving car and have a gear shift, not an automatic car, and you try to shift the gears without using the clutch, that's like going against God's law. You ruin the parts, and the engine will be broken after a while. That's why we need to obey God, is following the rules. And we looked at the Sabbath pause as part of the purpose of life. The history of the Old Testament is progressive, as we have seen briefly when we looked at God revealing himself increasingly until he reached the point that the world was ready for his solution. We read that in Galatians 4, I think, in the beginning. When the time was ripe, God sent his son, subdued under the law and born by a woman. This little sentence, when the time is ripe, sums up history and reveals and explains to us how God was preparing this stage throughout the centuries and the millenniums, even there were thousands of years to follow. Later on, when we will see the full picture, when we are with him, we will understand all these things that may go beyond our understanding at this point. But it's good to see this in the revelation of Scripture, that he is working progressively towards a goal, instead of cyclical, like we see in many in Asian and in other philosophies and religion. Then another point of Bible, the world is good, created to be enjoyed in union with God, not in disunion, like Adam and Eve tried. They enjoyed disobeying God. That caused evil. Evil entered because of man's disobedience. Man is meant to complete creation, to organize it. God has given us so many gifts and the ability to invent things, to create machines, to make life easier. The moral economic cycle, keeping the commandments, leads to profit. Disobedience leads to poverty and even disaster, misery, and death when foreign kings came, invaded the land, and killed the population. Love and gratefulness to God instead of duty. And the Sabbath is also an important part of Old Testament philosophy. It's an ontological pause. Ontological means the essence of our being. It's not just a duty that we fulfill, but it's something that is engraved in our nature. As we looked at it yesterday, that it doesn't work, and societies who tried to use a different rhythm, like the communist Russia, 10 days work, that doesn't work. It doesn't fit with our nature, with our being. Not just to increase performance, like Gilgamesh did, but to enjoy the fruits of work. the Bible is really, and especially the Old Testament, full of enjoyment. The feasts, the music, the eating, even yeah, some of you may have, I don't know how much you have been influenced by American theology. They forbid drinking of wine, but it's obvious that Jesus converted water into wine, and wine was being used, but we also have warnings that you should not drink too much wine and get drunk, but rather be filled with the Holy Spirit. So the good use of God's gifts is a very strong strain and element in all of the Bible. Love God and gratefulness to God and enjoy life instead of duty. Sabbath, yeah. The tithe and the early social law is an important part. Tithe, giving back to God. Tithe has a double meaning. On the first place, or one side is attributing what I have received to God and acknowledging that it's his gift. Like Jesus teaches in the Lord's Prayer, our daily bread give us today. Even if we work for it, the prayer tells us that God is the one who gives. So giving back to him a part, a tithe, that means that we acknowledge his gift and we give him back some. And it's also in the New Testament, in the Old Testament, it was used to provide for the priests who were doing the temple service and could not do farm work and provide for their living. So through this tithe, the Israelites supported the rule of the community, which happened through the temple. Now, yeah, this has later shaped the tax system, this idea that government, that's a very big issue that we should look at. We may have some time today and will take, if not more time tomorrow, at the unhealthy development of the power of governments, how they have taken over God's place to a large degree, and how they are exploiting their citizens by overtaxing them. The Jews were giving a tithe and a little more, but today in Germany, taxes, if you add all of the taxes, go over 50%. So there's an official taxpayers association. They have a clock that counts the taxes we pay, and we work according to this clock. We work up into July, so over half of the year, to pay for the government, and only after something like the mid of July do we work for ourselves, if you put this into a year's schedule. So governments have overloaded this and have expanded this idea of people giving to support government workers. We have a far too big bureaucracy and too much state. It goes back to a statement that, well, the whole development is historically widespread, but in the West, we have this statement of German philosopher Friedrich Hegel, who said, the state is the march of God on earth. So this German philosopher, Hegel, brought God down to earth in form of the state. That is a very dangerous statement. And we see that this has influenced our thinking to a large degree. And even many Christians in Germany, they believe in the state far too much and expect far too much from the state. In the Bible, we see that the state is quite limited. The priests were doing the service, they were giving rules, but the people were organizing themselves and doing things together. And that's the model I want to talk about later when we talk about the cooperatives. taking interest was usually forbidden from fellow Jews. Jews could take interests of foreigners, but not from their fellow Jews, and especially not from the poor. That was forbidden because it was considered to be a means of exploitation. Theological approaches in the early church, a famous monk and person in the Middle Ages was Benedict of Nursia, the founder of the Benedictine order. He taught the monks to pray and work and created a daily rhythm from morning prayer, work, noontime prayer, work, and eat, of course, and then evening prayer and rest. So he didn't himself make the statement ora et labora, pray and work, but it was later formulated, but that really characterizes his approach of the monastic rules. And his monastic rules of life are even used today in management courses by some who are not antagonistic against the church. Some of the teachers have prejudices and antagonisms because of their experience with the church. But Benedict really set a good rule and ground for work and pray. Love your neighbor as driving motive of the care for the weak. Out of this monastic life grew Martin Luther, the famous German reformer. He was a monk himself, and he rediscovered these laws because in his time, the church had established, again, a hierarchy of faith. There were the clergy with their wonderful robes and ceremonies that created an atmosphere of holiness, and people felt inferior. So the higher class was the monks and the clergy, and the lower class was the secular people who worked and who did farming, or soldiers or merchants. And Luther said, this is not according to the Bible. Every work is service to God, like we discussed when we looked at the foundation of work yesterday. It's not sure, it cannot be proven that this statement that I have written here about washing diapers is really a quote, but he had many table talks and he had students live with him. When he married his wife, she was a former nun, Catherine, and he questioned many teachings of the Catholic Church that were not biblical, but at a closer look turned out to be power movements, like getting monks and getting priests into a celibacy that keeps them under the influence of the church and prevents them from developing own unity of life in their family. So they continue in total reality to the church. And so he questioned all of this and left the monastery, and that his teachings also influenced nunneries, and nuns left, and he married a nun. And because they had nothing as monks, they were poor. The prince of the area, who was favoring Luther, also because Luther was diminishing the Catholic power and influence, and the prince didn't like that. So he supported them by giving them an anti-monastery. And Catherine was a very shrewd businesswoman. She really organized life well. And Luther was the teacher and the preacher, and she turned this monastery that they had been given into a boarding school. And they brought students in who brought a little pay, and they also worked. They got lands of farming, and she really worked in providing for these students and involved them with work also. And they would have common meals, and Luther was giving table talks, and in his they were students were writing, taking notes like you do now. And out of these table talks is probably the source of this statement, just to tell you a bit about Luther's life and teaching. And in that, he said, washing diapers and plowing fields is of equal service to God as preaching and praying. Now, this was really a confrontation to the clergy who felt superior, and washing diapers is a dirty thing that, yeah, some women do sometimes when they have children, but this is not what you dirty your fingers with as a priest or a clergyman. And plowing fields is quite tough also, but Luther said this is equal service to God. And that shows a profound biblical attitude to life. And he was the one to emphasize vocation and calling. Because if you consider work as service to God, then you need to find out what type of work have you been called for? What is your vocation and your calling? It's not just a job to feed your family, that's a byproduct, but it's a contribution to the world, to build this world. That is Luther's contribution, one of Luther's contribution to the economic, to teaching of economics. Another reformer in Switzerland, closer to you now, is John Calvin. He did not so much emphasize the calling, but he emphasized the virtues. Three main virtues are attributed to him. They come from his teaching, and they have made or created the three Protestant virtues: modesty, honesty, and diligent work. They honor God. That's what Calvin read out of the Bible. And so he came to this conclusion: earn more is good. Earning more is good, but not to become richer, build bigger houses, buy bigger yachts or whatever, but rather to give more. His idea, and that's the profound Calvinist approach, is to live according to your social status, dress accordingly, have a house accordingly, but not excessively. If you earn more, use it for the community, feed the poor, and help the needy. Wealth was a sign of blessing of God. Yeah. Later, out of this, this new model was developed, the cooperative societies. This is Friedrich Wilhelm Raiffeisen. He was serving in the military, but because of an eye problem, he could not continue his military career. So he got a job in the office he was a mayor in a smaller town, started even not far from my home here in central Germany, in a mid-range mountain area. And at that time, there was a huge volcano accident which caused climate change, became colder because the clouds covered the sun. That was over a longer period. And this caused harm to the harvest. They had little or no crops, the farmers, and there was a danger of starving. And then farmers, to have more crops, they would sell their lands, and in very extreme cases, even sell themselves and their family members as slaves in order to survive. And he observed this need and thought, this is not just. He was a devout Christian, a Protestant Christian. He knew the Bible well, and he applied these principles that we have looked at yesterday. And he said, we need to find solutions. So he got the rich people in town together and said, we cannot observe our fellow citizens starve and be in such a need. Let us build a cooperative. Let me wait. Yeah, let us build a cooperative to bring some help to these farmers. And these are 4 bullet points here that characterize his overall approach. He organized farmers for mutual help. They were putting money together, those who had money, and those who need it, they would loan money. And then a low interest rate would be agreed upon and a way to pay it back. And the rich were included also. And this was a membership of all of these rich and poor citizens to work together and to support each other. The wealthy were involved. They started banks because the banks and loaners at the time were using the grievance, were using the poor state of those in need to exploit them. And so high interest rates were demanded that ruined the existence of those who needed help. So he started banks that would give low interest loans. And he involved the church to establish ethical and spiritual structure of responsibility. This is a very interesting model where Christian ethics and Christian thinking and strategic planning got entered into economics. Now here are 6 points about the influence of his Christian faith on Raiffeisen's cooperatives. The ethical foundation was found in is to be found in Matthew 25, verse 40. Maybe someone can read this.
Matthew 25, verse
Matthew
40.
25, 40.
And the king will say, I tell you the truth, when you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were doing it to me.
So Raiffeisen saw that some of the brothers and sisters were in real need, and Jesus was praising those who would help those in need and do good to them. This motive of loving your neighbor and taking care of the poor that we already saw yesterday was a driving motive for him. Then he also involved the local church. Wait, I have a document that I can read.
I don't think we are able to hear you.
I think you are muted, Hans.
Your mic, yeah, I see your mic needs to be turned on.
I touched this. Thank you for telling me. Sorry that this happened.
That's fine.
The role of the church. Raiffeisen believed that the involvement of local parish ministers was essential for establishing cooperatives. That is very interesting. He integrated church and real down-to-earth economic life and the needs. He saw the church as a bridge between economic activity and spirituality, fostering a sense of community responsibility. While he avoided denominational divisions, Catholic, Protestant, whatever, he relied on clergy to support and legitimize his initiatives. So money would only be lended to people who had proven by their character that they were reliable, not just to anyone who would rob it and not pay it back. So this was at the same time a demand on character. So he was quite realistic about the problems of people, their material needs, but also their spiritual conditions. That's why the third point was included self-help with spiritual discipline. Raiffeisen rejected charity as a long-term solution. That is a very crucial point because Western development aid in the past decades has always been based on this principle, giving money to poorer countries. And that has raised an infantile society where people don't think about how they can develop their resources, how they can build machines and help themselves, but they wait for money and for goods to come from the rich donors. And they don't work for themselves. This is really degrading and dehumanizing the recipients rather than giving dignity to them. So instead, he promoted self-help based on Christian principles. His motto derived from the Bible, if a man will not work, he shall not eat, in 2 Thessalonians 3, verse 10. Quite realistic, as Paul said. It underscored the importance of personal effort combined with communal support. So there may be times of need where people cannot make it on their own. That's where the community comes in. They strengthen each other and build structures to help. There's a lot available in the internet on the Raiffeisen cooperations. So if you're in a country and in a place where this can be applied, you can find a lot about this as you do research. Also, my colleague, Andreas Wieland, has taught in Wieler twice before, and there's he is an expert on this on these cooperatives, and that his talk is to be found in YouTube. I will give you after the break the link, and I'm sure the school has it too. It's part of the teaching, and it's in the internet, open access. This approach encouraged individuals to take responsibility for their own welfare while working collectively. Then the community-centered mission, that is feedback and a back effect on the church. He aimed to revive a Christian sense of community through cooperatives, which were structured to promote philanthropy, prevent poverty, and foster spiritual discipline. For Raiffeisen, economic success was secondary to the moral and social development of membership, of members. This idea that the church is there to bless the nations, which God told Abraham when he called him, I will bless you, make you a great nation, and through you bless all the others, has also been mandated over to the church, because in Romans 4, Paul exposes that we as Christians are heirs of Abraham to inherit his blessing. And so we should also bless the nations. And that was really understood in a practical, down-to-earth sense by Raiffeisen, by his community-centered mission. Integrating faith and business, Raiffeisen established a trading company linked to his cooperatives, directing profits toward his mission. He envisioned a community of spiritually committed individuals who would integrate their faith into cooperative work. Though not fully realized during his lifetime, this idea reflected his belief in combining economic activity with spiritual purpose. And many have taken this model. You can just do research around the world how much this has been followed and put into practice. Sadly, though, the present-day cooperatives in Germany are completely godless, so to speak. Faith does not play a role, like it has happened in most of secular society, that God has been left out of the picture. He's reduced to church activity. That is a sad development, but it at the same time means, why should we accept this as the given, as the reality? Why should we not return to the origin, and bring back work and economics under God and do these initiatives under God? So that's the inspiration and the challenge also for you as you go to your respective countries and perhaps will be called to influence society to build such models. Raiffeisen emphasized long-term vision that cooperatives should focus on sustainable achievements rather than short-term financial gains. That's a contrast to the present shareholder value, where you gain from the profits made out of businesses in the stock market. So it puts some questions on the stock market. Stakeholder value, where you own part of the business and therefore are responsible for what's happening in the business, is much more of a biblical concept. And this is, in a way, an application of stakeholder profit. So this long-term perspective was rooted in his Christian values of stewardship and service to others. In summary, Raiffeisen's Christian faith was not merely an inspiration, but a foundational framework for his cooperative model. His initiatives sought to address both material poverty and spiritual well-being, making his cooperatives distinct as both economic and moral enterprises. Yeah, I got this from the internet, to be open. You can find many things about it, but I wanted to point you to this model. It's a very interesting model to be studied and thought through how it can be applied in local situations. And yeah, similar questions I have now. I need to return to the PowerPoint. Oh, yes, it works. Wonderful. Yeah, I've put some more things in the Brotverein. That's how it started. This is from the official website of the Raiffeisen Association, founded by Friedrich Wilhelm Raiffeisen in Weierbusch during the famine winter of 1846-47, as an institution of charity and self-help, gave rise to the Heddersdorfer Darlehenskassenverein. It is a bank, a community of banks, which I talked about in 1964. This marked the birth of the first rural cooperative, the Anwaltschaftsverband der ländlichen Genossen, Association of Rural Cooperatives, of 1877. It was the origin of a large organization that has existed since 1948 in the German Raiffeisen Association, but it has no reference to God anymore. That's sad. They have taken the profits and left the roots, which is not a wise thing to do. But just to give you an idea, now we have the 15 minutes break. And if there are questions that you would like to ask, we will begin with that part in the break, after the break, before I follow with the other material. But this was my main point to cover before the break. So, have a good this important topic on how to use economics well to bless countries. Thank you that you don't want to exploit the world and exploit your creation and your humans, your image on this world, but you want us to flourish. You want us to establish flourishing structures, flourishing procedures and systems that will build and increase wealth and well-being. And I pray that you will use this course, and even as we have discussed this idea of cooperatives, and it will be further in our minds, and we will think about applications. I pray that you will use each of the participants to find ways to make the best of this in their respective environment and countries. Thank you that you have promised to give us wisdom as we ask for wisdom and also guidance, because you want to be our guide and leader. Amen. So let me share the screen again.
You get,
You
yeah.
click that thing.
Yeah. And now
The green.
this one.
Very good.
I think
Thank
green
you.
should go first.
So are there any questions that you would like to ask about this?
I have one question.
Please.
It's about the loans and interest,
Mm-hmm.
and especially for Christians and what we are seeing, you teaching, and is it really something that it's advisable for Christian in the modern situation in the modern world that maybe they charge interest based on the money or within the cooperatives or within what they do? Or how can you really advise about money and interest and loans in a biblical principle to the current situation?
Advice about interests and loans in the current situation using biblical principles.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because we are in secular systems, we cannot immediately change them. We cannot force the banks to do things. But that was Raiffeisen's idea, to create independent, smaller units that still are building positive, supportive power in order to help those who are in need, to make this a fruitful and a blessing for those involved. And this needs creativity, and yeah, it depends on your local situation, whether you can. In the church community would be the ideal place to start, because there you have like-minded people under God, at least a certain amount, where such things could be organized. And if you want to leave the secular system, interestingly, secular groups are organizing themselves already, because they see that the present money system is in high risk area for collapse, and they are trying to build cooperatives independent of the secular money system, so they can support each other with goods and needs and services. But that's something the church should think about, how they can create independent, smaller units that help those. And the present system, state system, is for making money, making profits, and exercising power, and not really for helping the poor. So I have put two links at the bottom, here, of the expert on this topic, Andreas Wieland. He taught in Wieler years ago, I think, or 3. I'm not quite sure. This is the first self-help cooperatives. It's a longer presentation that he gives on YouTube. And the second is, even as he talks to African leaders in a group, it's a shorter 1-hour presentation. And You cannot get to the links, at least I cannot, directly from the PowerPoint, but as I copied this link onto a Word document, I was immediately able to open the link and the YouTube would start. So that's it. It'll be in your presentation. I will make to turn the presentation into PDF and then send it to the school because in PowerPoint it's too big. And yeah, should be in PDF. So that was about, I don't know how much I can help you with that answer and request. The present system goes by interest and by usury, and it's all in the hands of the powerful. We cannot immediately change this, but we can build small units to help each other. That was Raiffeisen's idea.
I also, sorry.
Yeah, I'm never alone. I'm ready for the next question.
I was also having some questions regarding that area. Currently, like if I read the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, it says like we should let go if someone could not really pay the interest or the actual amount. So if I took that principle, for example, if I opened a new bank, and how can I actually implement this a biblical principle?
Good question. Yeah. That statement from the Old Testament is in a context where people are observed and there is some sort of social control in the Jewish community. And so if it says someone really cannot pay back if there's an extreme situation, then this is a good way to apply it. For a bank, they have to implement control systems because otherwise the bank will go bankrupt if they pay, if the word gets around that the bank will drop the debt if you cannot pay back. Then people will say, oh, I cannot pay back, I have no money, so drop my debts. People will be misusing this, and that's why there needs to be more control in a banking system than because we don't have this Jewish community that is the context of where this statement was made. I think the normal rule that also Jesus observes in the parables is that money should be paid back, and only if the loaner, the lender, is in a position to forgive, then he can do that, like the emperor did, or the owner. I think it was not emperor, the king, like the king did with his one servant who had a huge debt, and he said, okay, I will forgive you. And then this guy went to a fellow servant who owed him only very little and demanded it with all fervor and put him into prison. This parable, I think Jesus implies that money should be given back, and unless the one who is in the position to decide says, I will forgive you and you don't have to.
And another follow-up question for this is like in another scripture from Bible, it says like you should not lend money for interest or something, if I could hardly remember.
Yeah.
So in that way, it is actually also not encouraging not also to give money for interest, but also not to take interest back.
Yeah. That command was given to the Jews for their fellow Jews. They did not have inflation at that time. I think inflation that we experience very real puts us into a different context where if you loan money, it will lose its value as it's being paid back. So a certain amount of interest in the present situation is justified also because we are not living in a community with Jews to Jews where the command, the law was given. It is justified because in order to preserve the value of the money for the one who has given it, to create justice. And from that sense, I think we need to apply the principle of the biblical teaching is that there should be no exploitation, but support. And the supporter should not be punished by losing value of his money. So an amount of interest at the level of inflation is justified when you loan money. That's my opinion. There are really conflicting opinions on this. The Prabhu Guptara, an Indian macroeconomist who is one of my teachers, he is totally against usury. And he served as the leader of the training department of the USB Bank in Switzerland. He is retired now and lives in London. He has extreme positions. He's also a mentor of Vishal Mangalwadi, Prabhu Guptara. I will write his name on you and you can Google him. There's things that you can find from him. So yeah, you need to discuss this with your community and you need to come up with solutions that you can live with and that you feel are in harmony with God teachings. It's not easy in a society which is so complicated and multi-level and so many influences come in to make good decisions.
I have
The questions.
I mean, with this, I've been in some situations where, in India especially, people mostly they do fixed deposit in banks, so that the bank will give a monthly interest. It is actually being very helpful to many people in many cases.
Mhm.
But then, especially in the church, the way this scripture was taught was little, uh, like really shaking the families. And then, yeah, there was huge debate on it.
Mhm.
Someone says, it is government rule that the bank should provide interest for the fixed deposit that people gave. It is their interest to give you interest. And people, they say like, no matter what it comes, it is against the Bible, then it is bad. We should not take. Uh, what would you say regarding this?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very concrete question. Now I understand what's behind it. You always have people in church that take biblical statements a bit out of context. They read them and they say, oh, we need to follow this. But it may not be wise to take these statements out of context. They are correct and they are given in a certain time to the nation of Israel. And when you look at the New Testament, they when the debate is about the Mosaic law, the apostles and the church come to the clear point that the Mosaic law is not binding for the Christians with all the food regulations and all the other regulations, but they confine on two, and the circumcision, many things that you find in the Old Testament. The question is in that church, do they also circumcise their children? Or do they do other things that the Old Testament, the Mosaic law demands? No, they don't, because in the New Testament, the Mosaic law has been fulfilled. But the regulations that God gives there are meant to help communities find into flourishing structures and procedures. So it is still helpful to look at them, but we need to ask, what do they mean in our context? And if the bank is working with money in the market, and they are offering loans, for deposits interest. I think it's okay to do that, and it's the Mosaic law does not refer to this. Is my opinion. But that's a difficult question in the church. There, it's good that to have pastors who are somewhat instructed and have some more theological training and understanding, and not just take a verse out of context and demand that everyone applies it literally. Because when we read Old Testament statements, we need to read them in the context and see where it happened, what was said, what was the principle behind it, what did God want to say through this. So I wouldn't favor this type of an application, that because Jews were not allowed to take interest from other Jews, today we should not use any interest, because the inflation is working against the value of money. So interest should at least cover the inflation.
Can I ask one last question? Sorry.
We have more time tomorrow if we don't get finished. I'm flexible about the content tomorrow. I think it's important this becomes practical for you, rather than that I teach all the stuff that I have. I can send it to you in writing and you can look at it. It's more important to find applications. So what's your next question?
My next question is like, with this kind of scripture, there is also one more argument that there are some people who use their money for especially this business. Like they lend money, and with the interest they gain profit, and that's how they do improve or multiply their money. And when these people came to church and they were confronted by Christians, and there is also a lot went on. So is it wrong for someone who does their business in this sector, like lending their money to gain profit? Is it not biblical?
That's very practical and touchy. I can see the point. Now, the real question is, why are these people coming to church? Are they coming to church because they are believers and want to live under the lordship of Christ? Or do they come to church because there's a community that could be used to make money? And if you're in that community, you can have a lot of advantages. So this is a question of motives. And I think if they do this in church, the elders should ask them, they should be asked by the elders. And then when it refers to money, I think Raiffeisen's models, where he involves the clergy and responsibility and works on ethical standards to avoid exploitation, I think this is an excellent example to follow and to work from, also for elders and for situations like that now. Raiffeisen, established creation of faith and business. Oh, I had this on this handout. His idea was not to make profit in the first place, but to help. Profit was the second issue. And if people come into the church and loan money and earn money through interests, then this should be questioned under this perspective. What is their purpose? Is their purpose to support the community, or is their purpose to make money and to become rich. And Paul gives some warnings about that in his letters. So money business in the church is something the elders should look at.
They were saying not only in church but also in generally outside also this work this business is considered as sin according to the Bible. That's what they usually say.
Mhm. That's an easy answer to a complicated question. If you name it sin, then you have solved the issue for yourself and you don't need to think further about it. But from this example of Raiffeisen, he was also lending money, and there was, of course, banks need to make profit, otherwise they cannot pay their employees. So some profit needs to be involved. But the whole thing needs to be placed under spiritual guidance and not left to the god of money, of mammon. That's the question for such an initiative. I don't know these people, and I don't know how much money they are taking, whether the interests they take and give are in the general level, in what's acceptable in the country or in the town. Yeah, I think it's nationwide usually. Or whether they are taking extra and whether they are greedy. But I cannot speak against your elders from here because it's a local decision. It's difficult. But I would really suggest to listen to Andreas Wieland's teaching and to study further about this. This goes beyond what I can teach here and also beyond our time. It is worth studying this because I think this holistic model of Raiffeisen, spiritual, practical, economic, financial, is a very good application of biblical principles, and that could help your elders make good decisions, how to implement biblical teachings and Bible verses. When you just take Bible verses, you're in danger of picking something here and then even find a contradiction somewhere else, and then you're really confused. I think that's what the purpose of such models is, to teach us and that we can learn from them. So my advice is to study Raiffeisen in order to make practical applications for your local situations. And after studying this and looking and questioning the spiritual motivation of these guys, then you may be ready to make a judgment on whether what they do is sin or whether it's maybe even helpful.
Mm. So, according to these situations, the conclusion you would give is like within this, sometimes intention matters to view.
Intention is important, not just what you do, because God looks
Yeah.
at the heart. And if the heart is evil, if there's an evil intention in the heart, like greed for money, then even something that may look good on the outside is not acceptable with God, and it will fail, it will cause harm, and it will come under judgment, because the word of God discerns the intentions of our heart.
Thank you, Hans.
Welcome. I hope it was of some help. The 2 lectures by Andreas, and we have half an hour. These are 2 books.
We
If
also
you
have a question in our
have a
class.
question, okay.
Yes, I wanted to ask if you can give us one example on how we can apply the involvement of the local church as it was said in the principle.
How we can apply what?
Involvement of the local church.
The word you said before, local church, I haven't understood well. Can you go closer to the mic?
Can you give us an example on how we can apply this principle of involvement of the local church?
Of people? Sorry,
I don't think he got your question. Could you rephrase it?
no, I don't.
Involvement.
In the principle of Raiffeisen,
Yes, that's what. It's good now. Say it again.
Can you help me understand the question?
In the,
One practical example of
in the principles that you showed, there was one point that said involvement of the local church.
involvement of the local church.
Can
Yeah.
you give us an example on how we can apply that?
Oh, I see. Yeah. Involvement. That was the word I haven't understood. Involvement of the local church. Well, that was the model that Raiffeisen created. He got the church pastor together and the people in town, because he was the mayor, he had a position to call people together. That was, of course, of great help. And they all built an association and they decided, a structure was built. They decided on how much money was placed in there and made rules about it, practical laws. So Raiffeisen would be the model, and it exceeds the possibilities here. That is the best model I can tell you from history. I don't know any present models at this point. Andreas may know, and I have not listened to all of his lectures. He may bring examples in his lectures. So it's a 90-minute lecture that he has given in Wieler 2 years ago. Please watch these videos and then search in the internet for such models. But what he did in this small town was the model. He got the elders, the church involved, the pastor, he got the rich people of the rich citizens involved, and he got poor people involved and created an association where they would sit together and decide about how much money will be put in the common bank and the interest rates would be decided. They all would decide this together. That was the model. And that gives us an idea of how the church could cooperate with local authorities and with farmers in a situation of need. It grew out of a situation of need because you need some pressure and emergency for people to leave their regular proceedings. Churches have their programs. Why should they be involved in economic procedures? Public governments, they have their programs and things. Why should they cooperate with the church? Only in a situation of need was there enough pressure for all of these different people to get together and to work towards some help. And Raiffeisen was the catalyst, the agent that God used to bring the needs to a solution, create a solution together and bring these different parties together. It's an effort to bring these parties together, and you may not succeed unless there is a real need. Without this need and without a problem that needs to be solved, it may be impossible to get church and government and people in one cooperative. But even from that cooperative, you could think about principles that it contains. And in a smaller scale, it could be built within the church, perhaps, that people do the same things which Raiffeisen did. I think this is all I can tell you about practical models. From this point here. Other question?
Yeah, I just have a question. So, it's something like microcredit. I mean, does that come under this cooperative, or is that something different?
No, it's a part of it, but the idea is similar, microcredit. Not giving money for free, but loaning and helping people to work in order to pay back, because that gives them dignity. Microcredit has taken the basic idea of this principle. And yeah, it's not in this complex context of church control or church observance and all of this, but there needs to be some responsibility structure and a structure to pay back the loan. Yeah, microcredit is a good example.
Thank you.
Other questions? Should I go on then?
Yes, please.
Yeah, two books that will be on in your notes. Famous books, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, how Max Weber, a sociologist more than 100 years ago, he's half Swiss and half German, observed that the Protestants were doing better in business. And the basic reason behind it is because the Protestants knew the Bible better, because the Bible had been taught in their schools, whereas in the Catholic Church at that time, it was not, the people had no access to the Bible, only the priests would read the Bible. So the power of the Word of God was limited in its effect in the Catholic circles and areas, and it had more freedom to develop its power on blessing the nations in the Protestant areas. That's what this book is mainly about. Interestingly, when communism broke down in China, and there was an era of freedom from about 98 to 2012 or 15, before it became very strictly dictatorial and communist as it is now, there was this era of fairly freedom, and many businessmen became Christians, and this book became a bestseller in China because people discovered how the Bible teaches wealth if you work well and work right. And another one I have not studied, it was just recommended to me by a Youth with a Mission colleague from Peru. She's teaching politics and economics, also inside Youth with a Mission, Anna. And she's recommended this book. This Professor Hernando de Soto is not a Christian probably, but he's using biblical principles in showing how wealth can be produced in a way of blessing. So if you want to study more about the positive use of capital and a good application of capitalism to bless nations, these are two books that I would recommend. Also, we have the German model, social market economics, which was built after the Second World War. It is rooted in responsibility before God and men, which is a statement in the German Basic Law in the preface. Human dignity, self-responsibility, freedom, and right to live are behind it. And in this German form of the social market economy, the idea of freedom to create business, freedom to earn money, and at the same time responsibility for the poor was integrated. However, that's what some criticize, and I can see the point now. It was implemented within the state system. So social care became a job of the state. And that implies and starts a potential danger, which we are seeing right now in a vast scale. As long as the state is governed by people who are biblical in their thinking, this works well. But as soon as people come in who have a different worldview and mindset than biblical, this runs out of dimensions. It runs bad. And at the moment, this good system of social market economy with responsibility for the poor and freedom for entrepreneurship is exploited on the one hand by people who make money and live and work and do business for the sake of profit, like in the described predatory capitalism, where making money is the overall goal. And others are exploiting the social system by not working and making use of using the free payments from the state. And that's why foreigners are streaming into Germany right now. We have a huge problem of so-called refugees who are in reality economic refugees from countries, mainly young men from poorer countries, young men who don't work in their countries, and they have found out that in Germany you can live without working and be paid by the state in the social system. This will ruin our country, and many economists and wise people are very concerned, and many are saying Germany is already down, it's lost, we are living on debt. Politicians are creating money and printing new money. Now they've just decided for a new huge debt that is shocking to people who have understanding about what debts mean. It will mean, if they continue, a breakdown of wealth and exploitation of savings and a real economic breakdown. So that is what the system has led to. It has been, within the last 10 years, has been terribly exploited and has lost the good that it had because too much authority and too much was given into the hand of the state. The state with its power to regulate life and to raise more taxes and to build more offices and employ more state servants becomes an end in itself. It's called bureaucracy. And bureaucracy in the term itself is a contradiction. Administration is a much better term. This is just a side remark. Bureaucracy, the bureau, is the office that should serve people like the secretary or the the accountants. They serve the whole business so that goods can be produced and sold and salaries can be paid and bosses can make decisions and make strategies. That's what the office should do. It should serve. But bureaucracy, that's a Greek word. It means rulership. Democracy is the rule of the people, or the aristocracy is the rule of the nobility. So if the office starts ruling, and that's what we see in many countries where there's a huge apparatus of bureaucrats built in Brussels now with the European Union, and in many countries, they just find new laws and suppress the people and create new offices and exploit the nation rather than serving them. That is a result if government is given too much authority. That's why the Bible and free thinkers, like the Mises Institute, I should add this also to the notes. Mises Institute is an institute that was inspired by this free thinking of biblical freedom. They suggest a minimum of state authority. Also, you have a very drastic example. I don't want to talk about President Trump because he is so multifaceted and such a controversial figure. He does some very good things and some things are very questionable, and you can debate for hours on it, but it's of no use because we cannot change him. What we can do is we can pray for him. And God influences rulers that we can see from the Old Testament. There were several very powerful rulers while the people of Israel were in Babylon. And Daniel and his men, and also Esther, single people in this country, had a tremendous influence on these rulers and caused them to change their minds and declare God as the only God in the world. You know the stories from the book of Daniel and the book of Esther. So prayer for these guys is a key that is also recommended and not recommended, commanded to us in Paul's letters, 1 Timothy 2, 1-3, where we should pray for the rulers. So that's what we should do for President Trump. But there's an interesting guy in Argentina, Milei. He's also very controversial. He may not be an upright person. I've read about accuses that he has been unfaithful with money, is possible. But what he's doing in the state is highly interesting. He's diminishing the state. And he is a studied economist. I think, yes, I will do this. I read an interview with one of his study colleagues, who is now a German professor of economy teaching in Spain. And they had a small group of students together, friends, who were following the Austrian school of money. The Austrian school of money, handling money, is don't make debts, spend only what you have. This provides for safe societies and safe economies. And you will have low interest rates. And the other is the Keynesian model, following John Maynard Keynes from England. He is for making debts and using debts to spur and increase economy. And these are two conflicting models. And the model right now is that is followed is the Keynesian model widely. But Millet is a student of this Austrian school that is conservative about spending money and minimum state. What he's doing in Argentina has turned around the country in a very short time. Within a year, people are able to afford houses and anymore, and the economy is going into profits. He has cut state spendings tremendously and saved money. So he's a model to observe about minimum state and running a good economy. Whether he will succeed, I don't know, because there are so many conflicting forces and people are against him, and it's a big, complicated issue. But Milei in Argentina is an interesting person to study if you want to see someone follow the principle of small state, little influence by state, and more influence to the communities. That would be much closer to a biblical approach to state than the previous one under the socialist model. Do I have? Oh yeah, oh here. I'm sorry, I forgot to switch. These are the two schools. The Austrian school, which is represented by the Mises Institute and Millet. Save and spend only what you have. in the Keynesian school, most governments and economists today, debt making to increase and spur economy. Governmental programs to regulate market. Yeah. There's the following things. Yeah. They are criticisms. Just wanted to see what else I have. I think if you have questions to what I just shared about the state influence and interference, that might be more interesting than me going through all these details. You can read that and you already know that kingdom, that post-Protestant work ethics where there's no God and the work is the God. We ruin our health, family, and social environments. You can see this in many places that rich people get rich, but their families break apart because they are no longer following God's law. Work becomes an idol, maximizing profit. All of these negative and bad developments that we see. I have some people who comment on the present situation in an interesting way, also on the economic system. Gregor Gysi is a former communist politician from Eastern Germany, and he has publicly stated, the vision of a society without God is horrifying to me. So he doesn't believe in God, but he eagerly or likely profits from a society, Western Germany, that has been shaped by God's law. That is very nice to live in. But he himself doesn't want to be a believer. So that's a bit contradictory, but it's interesting that a communist, he is still a communist in the leftist party, he would say this. Dennis Snower is, he's retired now, but has been professor of macroeconomics and former president of the Kiel Institute of World Economics and Advisory Institution. He said about this theory of Homo economicus that man is just a being with needs, and these needs have to be fulfilled by economy, material needs, and that's it. He says, all of the most important experiences of my life had to do with human relationships. Everything in my life that matters to me is incompatible with selfishness. Economics are failing utterly if they are to explain my life. That's about this present school of materialistic economics. I am doubting the very foundations of my discipline. Our science is actually nonsense. A leading economist who was leading says this about his subject. So that's why we should be critical. That was already in 2012. And this brings us back to Thomas Sedlacek, who demands we must return to a value, human, and God-oriented style of economics, like the Sabbath economy in the Bible, the Old Testament of the Bible. So that was my history overview, but maybe you have some questions now. We still have some time, 5 minutes or so, and we can use it to talk.
Yeah, we can take some questions for now, maybe 5 or 7 minutes to go.
Mm-hmm.
If we have any questions, that some doubts on the teaching so far, I think we could.
Do you have study time today? I don't see my schedule before me. I think I will immediately put this into, I have changed it and don't have it in PDF yet. I will convert this into PDF and send it to SEMA. Is that the right person to send it to?
Yes.
And also the other materials, so you can pass it on to the students and then you can use it to study.
Yes, yeah, please do that.
Yeah, I'll do this right after we finish while you have lunch.
Yes.
Mm. So you can work on these things because this is too much to keep in mind, and maybe even too much to take notes, even though it's very good to take notes, and I'm sure you have. So are there any questions that you would like to ask?
I have a question.
Because of the shortness of time today,